we must look at the situation in the country for the last 2 years, especially with the COVID pandemic. It has been something very unsettling, not only for the country, but for the whole world. And I must say that we must compliment both the government of India as well as all the states, irrespective of party affiliations, how everybody has collectively fought this pandemic, and we have not entirely come out of it, but relatively the impact to India has been much softer than what one had expected. In fact, in the March of 2020, when the pandemic started, and for the first 3 months when the country was under complete lockdown, and the uncertainty which was prevailing all over the world, we didn't know what was the pandemic about, what is the cure about it, and then we just barely came out of it. We had a second wave, and then fortunately the third wave was a little bit of a milder one. But nonetheless, I think the pandemic has been a very unsettling moment for the country. And, some of the figures do reflect that things are much better. Gst Collections, as many a speaker have mentioned, and the finance minister mentioned in a budget speech also. But purely going by GST numbers and being very happy that we have achieved 1,30,000 crores for at least 5 months in this current fiscal year, while it is a good sign, but also it does not reflect the true state of the economy. There are many sectors, and I'm sure the finance minister is aware of it, which have still a lot of stress, and they need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed timely, especially her latest intervention in the budget about the hospitality, tourism, and related sectors, where she has announced a further package which was over and above the MSME package which was announced last year. Well, I must say that while some of the benefits have reached some of the industries, but I am sure that there have been a lot of fatalities, mortalities in this sector, also in the MSME sector. Many a small company have closed down permanently, which needs to be addressed, and I'm sure it is a matter of concern. The most destabilizing factor after the pandemic has come the Ukraine war. And I think when she delivered a speech on the 1st of February, Madam Finance Minister was not aware that this could be a situation which will arise a few days later. And the Ukraine war has demonstrated that suddenly, have you seen, the prices of fuel were going up, but they have really hit the roof, and Petroleum Minister is also sitting here in the House. He will acknowledge what are the special circumstances. We are comparing the current fuel price increase with something which happened during 2008-9. While we are comparing it, I don't think it is apple to apple exactly, because in 2008-9, there was no Ukraine conflict. There was some different situation. At the same time, the rupee then was around 40 rupees a dollar. Right now, the rupee is at around 77 rupees to a dollar. So there is going to be a major impact on the finances of the government of India, no matter how good we want to portray the numbers. Because these numbers, while 400 billion of exports have been achieved, very creditable, very laudable, but we must also understand that the balance of payments, we are also going to face an equally higher deficit because of the higher import fuel bill, which will lead to still the disparity between the exports and the imports, and that will be close to almost $200 billion this year. So I'm sure Finance Minister is aware of these issues and will address them suitably. I also would like to mention specially here that her budget speech mentioned some money coming from disinvestment of public sector. That the LIC disinvestment itself is on hold. That reflects that because of the uncertainty of the Ukraine war and the current economic climate, there is going to be a challenge for her to meet some of those numbers also. So while I'm not a complete proponent of disinvestment or not disinvesting, I would like to look at it objectively. But at the same time, I think your numbers on all heads of the budget are going to be impacted hugely because of this current situation which has arisen after the Ukraine war. I would also like to reflect, on the middle class, because the middle class is the most, I would say, the boxed in, the sandwich class of the country. They have very little flexibility. They cannot reduce their spending. They cannot increase their earnings. Most of them resort to minor savings. Most of them go to banks. Still, there's less, I would say, an eagerness for people, the middle class, to invest in other instruments. Some people do go to mutual funds and all, but that's a very small number compared to the number of people who want to put their savings in a more secure format. And therefore, today banks offering 3.5%, and compared to the inflation, official inflation figure of 6% plus, which you yourself have mentioned, you can imagine very well that an average middle class person cannot make two ends meet, cannot beat inflation with the amount of interest. In fact, the income will be reduced to that extent year on year. And the middle class feels the heat of high petrol prices, diesel prices, cooking gas prices, and all the general items on the inflation list which we normally see. So therefore, I feel that at least on the savings account, some kind of a balance. I'm sure the Reserve Bank and everybody wants to reduce interest rates for lending especially. But for people who go for savings especially, small people, I think we need to have a relook, because 3.5% interest rates certainly don't do justice to anybody. And on the other side, some of my colleagues have spoken about tax exemption limits. Again, the middle class is the one which is feeling the heat of the exemptions not being increased year on year to keep pace with inflation. I feel something needs to be looked at meaningfully on that account also. My point is about the current situation after the Ukraine war. We feel an increased threat perception all around the world, and especially in our neighborhood. We have Pakistan, a perennial problem to deal with. And China is also equally another perennial problem. And with the kind of geopolitics which is playing around in the world, India with its issues itself with Pakistan and with China, the continuous border issues going on in Ladakh and in other parts of Arunachal Pradesh, I think we need to look at our infrastructure development, especially in these areas, much more meaningfully. Yes, you are doing a lot in the road sector, especially thanks to the big cess you are collecting on petroleum products, which again is being redeployed for infrastructure building. I think it's good. There's nothing to complain about that. But at the same time, the infrastructure in the certain sensitive areas of the country which affect national security need to be addressed much, much more aggressively, because considering the way China is building roads, bridges, airports, railway lines, and all the other peripheral infrastructure all across Arunachal Pradesh and in Ladakh, I think it is very important that we spend much more money on our defense expenditure than what we are doing. And I feel sometimes when we go through some of the figures and when we talk in general, even with some of the people who are experts in the field, the amount of money allocated for capital expenditure versus the amount of money which is actually spent, there is a mismatch. I hope it is not, but if there is, I think it needs to be corrected. There was a lot of discussion on the crypto. Ma'am, I would like to state very clearly that I share the sentiments expressed by my colleague, Mr. Sushil Modi, and many other colleagues. Crypto is one of the kinds of currency which even somebody like me, I call a cryptocurrency expert. I sat with them. I tried to understand with all the wisdom at my command, and I failed to understand anything about cryptocurrency till date. I have not neither purchased, but I wanted to understand, at least to educate myself, to understand what this animal is all about. We went to Reserve Bank of India as a finance consultant, as a finance standing committee member. We tried to discuss with the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank is also very clear that they cannot allow this kind of currency to be, officially allowed in the country. And I agree with you. I agree with the sentiments which you expressed in your budget. I also agree with some of the provisions of tax and other, restrictive measures which you have brought in the budget. But I think it needs to be much more aggressively tackled, because this is an unknown animal. And for most people, if people like me, after calling an expert, have not been able to understand, I can imagine the average Indian who could be lured by the, easy money access and quick money multiplier to fall into the trap of this cryptocurrency. And most of them are fake. We read every day articles about people being, fooled into buying cryptocurrency. Some of my colleagues may not agree with me. I know that. I know some of the proponents of cryptocurrency are also there, both in this house and the other house. But that notwithstanding, I feel you need to be aggressive and take even more stronger posture. I'll just wind up. The NCLT, we brought in the IBC code with a good intent. You did get some success initially, but the NCLT and the NCLAT are still struggling to cope up with the numbers of cases which they have to deal with. There are so many vacancies there. Please do something about this. Otherwise, the IBC, the efficiency with which and the quick resolution for which it was intended to be legislated, that purpose itself stands to be defeated somewhere. So I urge you to look at that very meaningfully. A lot has been spoken about exports. Agriculture exports can be one of the biggest, I would say the backbone of Indian exports. And I think a lot is being done also. It's not that it's not being done, but we need to strengthen that. We really need to support. Today, aquaculture. We are the largest exporters of prawn in the world. We need to strengthen that, give more incentives there. Even about agriculture, you were mentioning, somebody mentioned about rice being, we are the largest exporter of rice. Yes, we do export rice to most of the world. We are exporters of dairy products. We are exporters of almost any item you can name in the head of agriculture. But I think, are we doing enough to promote agriculture exports? I think we can improve on what is being done so far. And finally, I would like to say that industry, while after the industrial licenses have been dismantled many, many years ago, anybody is free to set up an industry wherever, fine, that's not the real issue. The issue is that even today, after so many years, and especially my colleagues who come from the remote areas, who do not come from Mumbai, Pune, or Delhi, Faridabad, NCR, or other big cities, or Bangalore for that matter, people who come from the remote areas of the country, still the primary demand when you go to a remote district will be, हमारे यहाँ industry कब आएगा? हमारे यहाँ रोजगार लोगों का कब मिलेगा? How will that happen? I think the time has come that while we are being aggressive about industrialization of our country, we must come with some innovative measures where we incentivize industry, especially when it comes to backward regions of the country, the backward districts of the country. We have identified so many backward districts. We already have it in our schedule, and the government of India has it. There are some incentives given to those backward districts in terms of financial and monetary benefits, but those are very minuscule. But if you really want to industrialize those parts of the country, I think we need to have some more aggressive measures where industry feels incentivized enough to go there and set up shop there. That will lead to lesser migration to the bigger cities. And the strengthening of agriculture, increase in irrigation outlays, and industrialization of those areas will change the landscape of India from the rural migration to the urban, and will uniformly develop the country. I think that would be in the interest of the nation. So, sir, thank you very much, and I hope some of my suggestions would have a meaningful thought of the Finance Minister.
Thank you. The next speaker is K. Ravindra Kumar.
Sir, Deputy Chairman, sir, thank you for giving this opportunity. Union budget is for the entire country. It is because its proposal requires the states, the constituents of the Union of India to undertake and execute certain financial commitments for the development of the country. along with the path scripted in the union budget. The union budget for 2022-23 has been framed to pull the economy out of the ill effects of COVID-19 pandemic through increased capital expenditure.